Hello, my name's Megan Wright. I'm a PhD student at the University of York with the Hungry Mind Lab, and I'm going to talk to you today about what it means to be an adult and introduce 5 psychological domains of being grown up. I'm currently working on a paper on this topic with my supervisor, Professor Sophie Vonstone, entitled Beyond the Career and Care Crunch, 5 Psychological Domains of Being Grown Up. My PhD research is funded by Hogan Assessment Systems, and as I mentioned, I am with the Hungry Mind Lab at the University of York. So, what does it mean to be an adult? Most psychological studies test adults as participants, but we don't fully understand the psychology of adulthood, since the majority of developmental research focuses on growth in childhood and decline in old age. So, what do I mean by the term adulthood? The period of life from age 18 to 29 has been coined emerging adulthood, a period of exploration and identity formation. Research has shown that people begin to feel grown up towards the end of emerging adulthood, with individuals increasingly perceiving themselves as adults in their late 20s. We're interested in the period that follows emerging adulthood and precedes midlife, around the ages of 30 to 45, which we define as adulthood. This is when individuals are making the psychological transition to perceiving themselves as adults and navigating the world as their adult selves for the first time. In conceptualizing their transition to adulthood, individuals tend to rank psychological characteristics, such as becoming independent from their parents and making decisions for themselves, as more important than sociodemographic roles. Our conceptualization focuses on the psychological domains of young adulthood. These domains are defining characteristics of adulthood, independent of sociodemographic roles such as marriage, parenthood, and work, and are not covered by the trait domains that inform the maturity principle, i.e., the Big 5 personality traits. We identified our domains through scoping reviews of the literature in key fields of adult development, stage models, personality development, and lifespan research. Little research has focused exclusively on the psychology of adulthood, and we compiled our domains based on foundations present in the literature, as well as through interviews with experts in the field. We identified 5 psychological domains of adulthood, seen here: eudaimonia, sociality, sense of aging, good judgment, and self-regulation. These domains align with the developmental areas of emotion, cognition, motivation, and physicality. All domains have substantive and methodological foundations in the literature, although they have not been previously brought together in an attempt to define and conceptualize the psychology of adulthood. I'll take you through the domains in some more detail now. First, we have eudaimonia, a term borrowed from Carol Riff's research, defined as living life in a full and satisfying way by actualizing one's potential. Eudaimonia is a defining characteristic of adulthood because adults know and accept themselves to a greater extent relative to previous life phases. In adolescence and emerging adulthood, it's more common for individuals to experience insecurity and uncertainty about their own preferences and tastes. By contrast, adults seek out and engage in activities which they know that they enjoy. Eudaimonia is not the same as hedonism or pleasure seeking, but represents realizing one's own pleasures, understanding and accepting oneself, and pursuing activities, goals, and values that benefit personal growth and experiencing joy. Next, we have sociality. Individuals strategically shape their social environment throughout life, forming and fostering bonds through emotional, moral, and intellectual alignment, which provide lasting psychological and emotional benefits. By adulthood, the key nodes of a person's social network tend to be established, and with them, the type and strength of social connections that a person maintains throughout life. Research has shown that quality tends to outweigh quantity of social connections in the effects on well-being during adulthood. In contrast, during emerging adulthood, quantity of relationships was relatively more beneficial. Sense of aging. Aging is a gradual process that brings about physical, psychological, and social changes across the lifespan. But a distinct sense of aging begins to develop during adulthood. As a result of the subjective experience of aging, adults begin to witness their outer appearance fading, presenting with wrinkles and hair loss, and their resilience to injury and stress is also reduced. In addition, with increasing age, the notion that time is limited becomes more salient. Significant life events that are typically experienced during adulthood, such as parenthood and the aging of one's own parents, likely serve as catalysts for the internal realization of one's own age and finiteness. Good judgment emerges from the balance between problem solving and problem finding. Problem solving refers to solving previously identified problems using subject knowledge and technical skills, which are often acquired during emerging adulthood. Problem finding refers to the detection of gaps, errors, and inconsistencies, utilizing expertise and creativity, which have been shown to increase into adulthood. Finally, we have self-regulation, which refers to the extent to which people exert control over their thoughts, emotions, choices, impulses, and behaviors, according to their own goals and standards. Adults tend to have greater independence and autonomy relative to previous life phases. Also, adulthood sees a decline in risk-taking and impulsive behaviors. This suggests that while self-regulation is relatively stable from middle childhood onwards, adulthood may represent a time of mean-level change in self-regulatory behavior. These are our 5 psychological domains of adulthood. So how is this different to existing models of adult development? I'll take you through 3 existing models of adult development and explain how our conceptualization differs. First, we have Erik Erikson's seminal theory of psychosocial development, which reconceptualized the lifespan, introducing the concept that development did not stop after childhood and adolescence, and that later periods of life were important for psychosocial growth. Erikson identified 8 stages of psychosocial development across the lifespan. In each stage, individuals face a crisis and must overcome a developmental task associated with that phase of life. In Erikson's model, the ages of 18 to 40 years are coined young adulthood. They're relatively uncharted, with only one developmental phase associated with this period: intimacy versus isolation. During this stage, individuals are faced with the task of building long-term, loving relationships. The task for the next period, Erikson's middle adulthood, at age 40 to 65, is generativity versus stagnation, characterized by a need to give to others and leave behind a legacy for the next generation. By only assigning one developmental task to young and middle adulthood, this theory suggests that once we reach adulthood, only one value or psychological goal can be attained or strived for every 2 decades. But in reality, adulthood is a mix of many developmental, psychological, social, and biological processes which happen in tandem. Development during adulthood is complex, rich, and diverse. Next, we have Daniel Levinson's Seasons of Life, another theory which changed the way we think about adult development. Unlike Erikson, Levinson viewed his stages as being heavily constrained by age, and the duration and timing of the stages are very specific. A key node of Levinson's theory is the age 30 transition, in which individuals reassess the choices and life structure they made in their 20s. This is the period when individuals build a life structure for adulthood, the next stage of settling down. During this time, individuals strive to make a niche in society and to become more independent and self-sufficient, becoming fully one's own person. At age 40, the midlife transition begins, a period of intense introspection in which individuals reassess their life and attempt to come to terms with who they are ahead of moving into middle adulthood. While Levinson allows for multiple psychological goals from the domains of work, relationships, and the self to exist in the same time span, the strict timing for different stages restricts the amount of variation possible. Development during adulthood is not constrained to strict time periods. Finally, I also want to talk about established adulthood, a life stage of age 30 to 45, recently conceptualized by Claire Mehta and colleagues, and characterized by the competing demands of work and family life, dubbed the career and care crunch. This conceptualization creates a life stage for age 30 to 45, filling that gap between emerging adulthood and midlife. However, the term established connotes that individuals in this phase are stable, settled, and secure. But that's not always the case for people in their 30s and 40s today. Adults today are likely to spend extended periods of time in education, have a high rate and frequency of job changes, experience difficulty in securing financial stability and achieving home ownership, and delay or forego marriage and parenthood. Development during adulthood is more than sociodemographic characteristics. Adults are certainly influenced by their social roles, but they maintain distinct identities independent of their status as a parent, employee, or spouse. Theoretical models based on sociodemographic norms fail to fully conceptualize adulthood today, when cultural shifts and economic turmoil have changed both whether the traditional milestones of adulthood feel necessary and whether they're attainable. So, how is our model different? The psychological domains of adulthood discussed here are developmental domains, not hierarchical stages that follow on from one another. This allows for the reflection of greater variation and diversity in adult development. While these domains may influence and be influenced by sociodemographic characteristics, they're not tied to social roles, in that there is no expectation or requirement in this model to, for example, get married or have a career before one of the domains can be attained. Finally, while these domains are present throughout life, we believe that they become salient during the period of adulthood, around age 30 to 45, and that these domains reflect the psychology of being an adult. That brings us to the next steps for this research. The empirical validation of these domains is beyond the scope of the initial study, but we believe that qualitative interviews would be beneficial to confirm these domains further and extend our conceptualization. Following on from that, the development of scales for the domains and the administration of these scales would allow us to study within-person changes over time and explore whether these domains take on distinct meaning during adulthood, as well as investigate individual differences. We also need to consider the methodology for assessing within-person differences in the psychological domains of adulthood. For example, expanding our toolkit by using big data or maximizing passive data sets. Finally, there will certainly be variation in the psychological experience of adulthood, and research is needed to understand how these domains vary across different countries, cultures, and circumstances. And that brings us to the end. Thank you for listening to my presentation. As I mentioned earlier, I'm working on a paper detailing the 5 psychological domains of adulthood that I've discussed here today. If you're interested or want to know more, feel free to drop me an email. I'd like to thank my funders, Hogan Assessment Systems, the University of York and the Hungry Mind Lab, and my supervisor, Sophie von Stum. Thank you for your time.